Hi everyone and welcome back to the garden on yet another cold, grey, dark and windy day, but fingers crossed there's some September sun on its way very soon. We'll see anyway. But today's video, rather than an informative video about how to grow one particular type of plant or a tropical garden design theme, it's about the lessons that I've learned from the garden this year. And not just brand new lessons, the ones that I did know before, the things that I should know before, but mistakes that have been repeated, things that have happened again, and the things that I'm trying to improve in the garden next year. So hopefully you get some value out of it, and there's maybe some that apply to your garden at home. The first lesson then, quite a basic one, but here I am yet again. It's all about the spacing of plants. And it's so tricky to get that balance right where you get a packed sort of tropical jungle look by the end of September, but without going too far the other way and having plants hanging everywhere. So I know how tempting it is in May or early June when you're planting out your more tender tropical plants, the ones that can grow rapidly, can get to 2 meters plus in a single season. You see all that bare soil and you just want to pack them in because it looks daft having little plug plants or little plants that are maybe 4-6 inches tall dotted around the place, leaving a meter between each one. No one ever does that. But within 4 or 6 weeks, you're starting to realise that that soil has suddenly shrunk and disappeared and there's lots of big plants there. Another month down the line in the middle of August and you've got these huge plants all fighting against each other, hanging over the paths and patios, and you realise that you've gone a little bit too far. That's a mistake I made back in 2017 with that first tropical border, and in some parts of the garden here it's a mistake I've made again. And for me personally, my sort of get out clause this time is that I've tried a lot of experimental filler plants this year, plants that I haven't grown before, lots of vegetables, and there's some of those where they've worked quite well. In drier areas, the sweet corn, it's been quite well behaved and it's got to a fairly decent height. But the pumpkin on the other hand that I planted in the middle of that border, or should I say pumpkins, which is a bit of a mistake, should have just stuck with one. That sent out with vine that got to about 4 or 5 meters long in the month or so that I wasn't out in the garden this year. So it's definitely a case of look at the correct spacing for plants. Probably correct isn't the right word really, because there isn't a black or white definite answer, but just have an idea of how big the plants are going to get. So this is one of those lessons that I suppose you can only really learn with experience of growing these particular plants, of how tall they get, how wide they get, whether they flop over the plants or pretty much stay upright and do their own thing. And also you can go the other way and you can not have enough plants in your border. So it's also quite easy to go out in sort of May or June time, go to the garden centre, think I'm going to plant up this border, choose 5 or 6 plants that look nice, plonk them in the garden, think that's going to be an amazing tropical effect border, and come September or even August, you realise it's a bit underwhelming and there's not enough plants in there. So I've done that at the far end of the garden, a little border I just planted up as a sort of last minute. I didn't realise I'd be able to actually finish that part of the garden this year. Finish isn't the right word, but I didn't realise I'd get onto it. I put a few plants in and there's just too much bare space around them. And if you've got too much bare space, it doesn't feel like a tropical garden. It's just really a collection of a few small plants and it definitely doesn't have the same impact. So it's one of those things really. It's not so much a lesson as something I need to take into account more at the start of the season. Now that I've got a better knowledge of how big some of these new plants get, I want to improve it next year and try to have the right balance of small plants, medium plants, tall plants. I don't want to see any soil, but likewise I want to give each plant the room that it deserves. The next lesson then, similar to the first but with a slightly different twist, is underestimating how big or how tall plants can get, and it's so easy to do, especially when they size up very quickly. And the best example of that is the Gunnerat manicata behind me. That plant has really taken me by surprise with how big it's got. I have been down to Cornwall, I've been to Treba, and I've walked under them with the massive leaves with 8-foot stalks, and the leaves are maybe 2.5 meters wide. I've also seen this plant grow for a couple of years, and I know how quick it sizes up. But what I underestimated was just how fast it was going to grow. With a few key soil amendments and a lot of water, the growth has been absolutely monstrous this year, and it's got so big so quickly, to the point where it's actually drowned out and covered over a lot of the planting that I put around it, including my experimental pink china, which I think is doing alright, but obviously nowhere near as good as it could have done. So I guess really it's one of those things. You don't expect to have to research every single plant that goes into your garden, and you can't allow for its sort of maximum size from day one you're planting it out. But it's something to be mindful of. If you've got a plant, especially a lot of these tropical plants, they do grow so quickly and they get to a mature size very quickly. Just make sure you've got a bit of breathing space, or at least it's not going to impact on the plants around it. So the take-home point for me is if you've got a plant that's an especially big plant and you're looking at planting around it, it could be worth using filler plants for that first summer or the first couple of years to fill that space in, but ultimately those plants will come out at the end of the year and you'll have that room for the plant as it actually grows up. You don't really want plants that are going to fight against each other. You especially don't want to have spiky plants like yuccas and agaves pushing into plants with big soft leaves, because you're just going to rip them up and nothing will be happy. So I don't really know if there's a concrete take-home point there. All I'm saying is just be aware of how fast some of these tropical plants can grow and at least have an idea of how that works with your general design and how it sort of works with your garden. The next lesson is a very practical one, and it's something you'll have heard repeated again and again on your favourite Friday night gardening programme of choice, and it's basically be preemptive and do jobs before they absolutely need to be done. So a couple of examples. Firstly, weeding. This spring we had a really dry spring, nothing grew, not even the weeds. Basically everything in the garden stood still till around late May time. Then we had a lot of rain, and what that did is it caused every weed in the garden to start growing, and from there we've had quite a wet summer. So as a result, they just kept growing and growing and growing. They set seed, create weeds in other places. I've got an area at the end of the garden that I've not even started on yet, and the amount of weeds there is unbelievable. So with a little bit of maintenance early in the year, if you try to get those weeds when you first see them, it makes your life so much easier later in the year. Because if you can catch those weeds when they're still young, they come out so much easier. We don't have deep tap roots coming down. As soon as a lot of weeds get those deep roots, they're going to keep coming back again and again and again. And if you let them go to flower and go to seed even, they'll spread those seeds and you get even more weeds. So it's one of those things really. You're never going to be completely on top of all the weeds in your garden. And realistically, you probably shouldn't be. Some are alright. But if you put a little bit of effort in when it actually first becomes an issue, you can prevent yourself a massive problem further down the line. And the second one was staking. So staking something, you hear it time and time again, stake your plants before they need to be staked and supported. But I had that month when I wasn't very well, when I didn't do a lot of gardening other than watering, and what do we have then? Massive growth with all the rain and high winds. So a lot of my dahlias and some of the cannas just snapped or flopped over. And I've got some ricinus now that are probably about 8 foot tall, or should I say 8 foot long, because they actually grow horizontally and then come back up again. So they still look alright, but it's definitely not the look that I had in my head when I planted them. So with a bit of staking at the right time, if you can see a plant that's starting to get to a height where it's maybe a bit wobbly and its stem probably can't support it, put a cane in and tie it around it loosely. And if you do it at that point then, within a month or so, the plant will have outgrown the cane. You'll never see the cane anyway if you do it properly, but the plant will have that extra support, that extra structure there to stop it being blown over. So it's something that, again, a little bit of effort, or the same amount of effort whenever you do it. If you do it at the right time early in the year, it saves you having your plants smashed up and you'll get a better looking garden with less effort. The next lesson is something I touched on in the conclusion of my video, looking at 3 plants that have actually grown really well for me this year. Plants that have grown well despite the poor summer. And in that, I mainly looked at the Gunra manicata. The growth it's put on this year has been absolutely incredible, and it's done that despite not having a hot and humid summer. We haven't really had any consistent heat, but it's still grown well. And in fact, a plant like that, it just needs warmth and a lot of water, and it will grow really well. I think, on the other hand, the plants that I'd usually rely on, like in the old garden, I had some ensetis that got absolutely huge, cannas that reliably grew to maybe 2 meters plus for me every year. Those plants haven't done as well here. And in fact, a lot of the ensetis actually seem to have shrunk this year. They haven't put out many leaves at all. And I think really, the poor summer, the cooler weather, combined with here, a shadier garden, means the plants just haven't had the sun and they haven't had the heat they've really needed to actually do well. So the take-home lesson for me is, don't really have a garden that hinges on purely tropical plants. It looks fantastic when it does work, but it's only going to look fantastic really from June till around September every year. I think it's so important. If you want the garden you can appreciate all year round, if you want a summer tropical display that looks good even in years when it hasn't been that warm, I think you need to have a good mixture of plants. Have plants that don't need that heat. So don't just go for loads of fancy colocasias, loads of cannas and loads of really tender sort of exotics that you've never heard of before. Have a nice mix of structural plants like the tree ferns, like the palms, like the bamboos, plants that will grow well pretty much all year round, plants that will look good all year round. And then also mixing with those flowers like here, Salvia amistad. It's been an absolutely great performer. It works so well with the tropicals. It's attracted a lot of wildlife to the garden, and it's grown well despite the shade and despite the cooler temperatures. So I think it's really important to have a mix. As much as I encourage you to go all in on a theme, sometimes you can't really rely, especially in the UK, of having a great summer every year. So it's about having a good garden that still looks good despite those temperatures. And the final lesson for today, I'm actually going to cheat and pack 3 in, mainly because 5 lessons sounds like a good YouTube title, 7 just sounds a bit weird, like you were trying to go for 10 but couldn't think of 3. And that is actually going to be enjoy, experiment and chill out. Now before you say it, that's not the gardener's version of live, laugh, love. It's not something I've got written on the bedroom wall or tattoos on any part of my body, but I think it's something that's especially important, particularly after this year. When it comes to enjoy, I know it's a cliche to say enjoy your garden, and reality is a lot of my time in the garden this year is either spent filming videos or actually doing projects and extending the bits of the garden I'm working on. But I enjoy that. That's my form of chill out. I enjoy pretty much all the jobs other than maybe weeding and staking, pretty much the jobs that I haven't done this year. But for me, that's my escape, and I enjoy coming out here with the camera as well, just snapping away, getting pictures of plants that take my interest or a certain look that really looks fantastic in the light. That, for me, is how I enjoy the garden. And as it becomes more complete, we'll have more people around, we'll have a little fire pit area at the end. And the plan is to actually enjoy spending time out here, watching the plants grow and doing everything that you should do in a garden. But I think it's one of those things, you can sometimes get so caught up in actually looking after a garden, the planting, the feeding, watch the water, what needs winter protection, what needs what at what time of year, that you can forget just to go out there and enjoy it. And if it's a Saturday morning, go out, have your breakfast outside, obviously in summer because I wouldn't want to be doing that now. If it's a nice weekend, then just have a nice potter. Do whatever you need to do to enjoy the garden, it really is so important. And following on from that, my next point was to experiment. Now, a lot of the mistakes I put in this video about having plants that have grown surprisingly big, or plants that didn't fit in the places where I put them, or new plants that have grown well despite the temperatures, a lot of those lessons have actually come from experimenting, from trying new plants, from just going through the catalogues, choosing seeds out that I think fit in with the aesthetic. And this time of year, it's a fantastic time to get those seed catalogues, and it doesn't just have to be exotic plants. Just go through, look at vegetables, flowers. Chances are there's so many things in there that'll grab your eye, and there's something that you can try growing in your garden next year. And if nothing else, just the enjoyment of growing something from seed, even if it doesn't really fit in with your garden, it's just such an enjoyment sort of process in itself. So that's definitely my next point. And when it comes to my third and final point, it's chill out. Now for that, obviously it's one of those things. A garden can be stressful, especially during winter when it gets really cold and you have to sort of worry about wrapping things. When it's summer and you might have to water a bit more frequently than you'd like to. But a lot of the time, these are just small jobs in the scheme of things. And when it comes to the garden, it's never going to look perfect. So don't stress about every single bite mark in every leaf. Don't stress about the plants that haven't grown as well. And don't stress about the mistakes that you've made. Whether you put too many plants in, not enough, something's grown too tall, or something just hasn't grown at all. You can't stress about these things. You just need to learn from it from next year, see if there's anything you can improve, see if there's any new plants you can put in their place, and basically just juggle things around, and eventually you'll find something that works for your garden, your space, and how you want it to look. So thanks for listening to me ramble in this video, and I'll see you in the next one.